Welcome to Voices of Esalen. I'm Sam Stern. Today our guest is Jacoby Ballard, educator, activist, yoga teacher, and author of A Queer Dharma, Yoga and Meditations for Liberation. Jacoby is a trailblazer in the world of contemplative practice, bringing decades of social justice work into the spaces of mindfulness and embodiment. In our conversation, we explore what it means to foster wellness spaces that truly support queer and trans people, especially in this moment in history. Jacoby shares what's bringing him hope, what freedom feels like in his body, how he's navigating the joyful journey of raising a trans child. And we also talk about anger, how it can be useful, even sacred, when harnessed with intention. I really hope you enjoyed this conversation with Jacoby Ballard. So, Jacoby, obviously we're living in wild times. How do you personally stay grounded and connected when you feel despair or when you're overwhelmed by the scale of injustice? Is there a specific practice that you return to?
Yeah, a couple of them. One is that I make sure that I meditate every day and I sit in silence. And, it's a practice of like blocking out all the noise, multiple emails from the New York Times every day. I'm like, this just in. And so I turn to my meditation cushion as a refuge.
Mm.
And then I also think a discharge practice is really essential right now. So for me, it's running and swimming, and sometimes yoga asana as well, but just like moving energy so it doesn't get stuck in my body because there's so much coming at so many different communities. And as a trans person in the world right now, I know that my survival depends on that. And I also hold a lot of space for queer and trans community. And so like I need to be reliable, I need to show up. And if I'm like overwhelmed and beyond capacity, then I'm not going to do my job well.
Mm. That's great. So a discharge practice.
Yeah.
In your book, Queer Dharma, you speak about this idea that liberation requires discomfort, that we kind of have to develop stamina to stay with that. And as you just mentioned, there's, of course, a growing effort from the upper echelons of power in the United States to really erase trans people from public life. And I was hoping that you could speak about embodied spiritual practice and if that work can lead to liberation.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think I take a lot of inspiration in the Buddha and other, awakened beings who, like, I think about Nelson Mandela or Thich Nhat Hanh, who all faced incredible adversity, and that deepened their spiritual practice, which is not to like excuse that adversity or wish it upon anyone. I don't at all want to head into the realm of that kind of spiritual bypass, but more to grow trust and faith in any community's leaders, and any of us ourselves who faced really trying times. That is just, if we survive them, then we're going to grow a spiritual depth. And I think through meditation practice, through yoga asana, it's largely a practice in staying in discomfort.
Mm.
So we're very well practiced for this moment because we take it in like micro doses. And of course, like right now there's much more than discomfort coming our way, but political crisis after political crisis. And I see it as like so essential to have some kind of spiritual practice to ground into, to hold your faith, to not go into realms of despair about humanity, and to not give up on other human beings, and given all the mistreatment of so many human beings right now in the world. And then also I think ancestral practices of, for any of us, tapping into our ancestors who has also survived incredible political repression or overwhelming conditions, that somehow they made it through. That's why we're here.
One of the pieces of your book, Queer Dharma, that I really enjoyed and resonated with was your work around anger. Obviously, what's happening today, it's bringing up, for me personally, an enormous amount of anger at the injustice. How are you currently approaching this emotion of anger, especially when I think about it in context of queer and trans communities where rage can be a wound, but also a source of power?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's how I'm primarily relating it to it as well, is like seeing the the power in so many communities that are standing up and fighting back. And whether that's like showing up outside a courthouse or showing up at Columbia University or, wherever something is being perpetuated or in nationwide protests on different like given days. I relate to anger as a wisdom that like tells us that something that is precious and important is being violated or dismissed or disregarded. And anger's protective fierceness is so important. And trying to balance that with like, it's not sustainable. We can't just be in rage for forever. So part of my work for the last 20 years has been working with, direct activists who are on the front lines. And so many of us enter activism out of great love for our communities, for the earth, for our people, and then get into activism as a way to have people power to change that which we're enraged about, right? Which is so important. But underneath that rage is always a love, right? The love for something precious to us. And so I think it's so important to tap into the love that's underneath the rage, because love is absolutely sustainable. And to like come at our work to approach the world not from like, not this, screw you, but from a place of like, oh no, I love that part of the earth. You're not giving it away to oil development, or these people belong in our communities. You're not going to deport them. They are our neighbors and our teammates and our colleagues. To tap into that, then we can like stay with the work. Whereas if we hold a ball of rage in our hands ready to throw it at someone, then our own hands are getting burned in the process.
Mm.
Then I see that in organizations and individual activists as well, that like that if we don't transform that rage, that it's going to come, we're going to burn out ourselves inevitably, and we're going to hurt relationships that are closest to us and most meaningful to us. Because if we're suffering, then that's going to ripple outwards.
Mm.
And so you can also think of it backwards as like coming from a place of love is a way of protecting people closest to us from the worst impact of our rage, or the, misguided direction that our rage can sometimes take.
It sounds like it requires a great deal of skillfulness. On a personal level, how are you doing right now in this moment, in this political moment? We're speaking in late April of 2025, amidst this kind of cavalcade of injustices. How are you doing?
Some days I'm fine and grounded and in my purpose. And other days, I'm trans. I have a trans child. I live in the state of Utah, which is like a testing site for Project 2025. And so it's terrible and can be quite overwhelming. So I've learned in those times when I feel overwhelmed that like I need to be around my people and to like reach out and like be surrounded and like let that insulate me again, to like remind me that like, yes, the Utah legislature might be passing 2 more anti-trans laws this year, and I am loved. My child is loved, leaning into like her school community, and that like she's known as a child and as a like leader in her kindergarten class. She's not some scary trans child that's, invading the girls' restroom. And so in that way, like the community can be really protective, is like in a personal level and a collective level. I think also like leaning into like investigating if like the school as a whole could be a community that we can rely on. Like in one of the last days of the Utah legislature this year, they pass a ban on the rainbow flag on state property. And I don't care that much about the rainbow flag. I and to ban it just seems so extra. And so I went to talk to the administrators of the school. There's rainbow flags in different like classroom doors and on some of the main hallways. And they said, we're not going to like fly it outside our school, but we're going to keep it up inside our school.
Mm-hmm.
And then if the state tells us to take it down, we're going to paint it on the wall so that they might they have to take down the walls.
Sounds pretty good.
And yeah, exactly. And I felt like so heartened by that. And like, yeah, that I wouldn't necessarily know that this whole school was going to support my family, and they are.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like our daughters are the same age. My kid is 5.5.
Oh yeah, oh sweet.
And it's been the best experience of my entire life, just getting to know this person. What do you love about being a parent to a trans child?
Mm. Her freedom, her self-determination, her insistence on being exactly who she is, and that I had to get there myself in my own path. And she gets that from day one,
Hmm.
because of the parents she was born to and the communities that we've been part of. And I think also for almost every trans adult I know who grew up deeply within the gender binary, there's a sense of shame and dissociation with the body. And my kiddo doesn't have that at all. She loves her body, her anatomy exactly as it is, and she's a little girl and loves sparkly things and also loves monkey bars. And like she sees no conflict between like there's never been, we've kind of insulated her from like expectations on gender.
Hmm.
And so I see her as immensely free. There's nothing she has to pretend to be. And I'm just, so then there's like so much energy that's freed up. And I'm just like, I'm so excited to see like who she can be and who any human can be that's like not so bound by the expectations of family or society of like, this is who you should be. These are the roles you need to fulfill. Where, I mean, I feel really proud of myself and my co-parent for just like holding it as wide as we can. And it also feels really reparative to me as a trans person to see in my child the possibility that I also aspire to.
I love that. I absolutely love that.
So there's all kinds of different trans people, right? And like, there's not just one path to be trans or to be non-binary. So it's there's many paths, and there's less and less gatekeeping in medicine. Although under this political era, I expect that to like close down again.
Right.
But there can be ways that like trans people feel like they have to prove they're trans or they're valid in their trans identity. And there's like legacies of stories about like being a man trapped in a woman's body or whatever that like that's an impact of the gender binary and that really limits who any of us can be, which like for some people, some trans people, that story is absolutely true, but I don't want it mapped on. It's not liberating to have it mapped on to every trans person.
Right. Right.
And so often because of the expectation of like certain external body parts mean a certain gender, means the expectation of a certain sexuality, so many of us like that cuts deep into like who we are, and some like we can cut off from different parts of the body, because they don't feel seen and regarded as fully part of us by society, or because we don't relate to that area of the body. And then there's if we can't access hormones or surgeries, then we just disembodiment and dissociation is one of the ways that we survive and like stay in a body at all and
Right.
don't die,
Right.
but don't have a relationship with that part of the body. But in that disembodiment, right, there's a division of ourselves, and that's going to have an impact on all of our relationships and our work and who we require ourselves to be.
What does freedom feel like in your body?
Being completely unmonitored, like moving intuitively how my body moves and knowing that I'm like inherently loved from the inside and inherently loved externally, that there's nothing I need to like do or change or a different way that I need to move to prove that love. And I think fully inhabited in myself. That's part of like for many trans people and many people in bodies in general that are just devalued by our society, um, to come into embodiment is hard and also so important. Like when we can exist fully inhabiting this body that the world is like condemning, that's that feels like freedom too. And I would also say that, like, it feels like a heart that's wide open and ready for anything, ready to love my neighbor despite what flags he's flying in his yard, ready to be moved by a child next door that's crying and maybe their parents are inside and don't realize that they just got stung by a bee. But a heart that's available to meet the moment, whatever the moment presents.
Let's talk about the realm of wellness and the body. And you don't shy away from critiquing mainstream yoga or wellness and that sort of complicity in capitalism and cultural appropriation. What do you think that the realm of wellness could benefit from understanding more about queerness?
Ooh. I mean, one that is liberating for all of us. That like no one fits the expectation of like what a man should be, what a woman should be, what a straight man should be, what a straight woman should be, let alone a queer person. And again, I think just like broadening possibility and like what the very notion of like what health and well-being look like is so historically, I mean, and a lot of us healers have done like a lot of deep work around this. And so I feel like, I have plenty of massage therapists that I would send my fat friends to, that I would send undocumented friends to, that have done a lot of work to expand their own notion of like what health and well-being look like. But in general, it's such a model of a white, able-bodied person. And if that's the expectation, like that all bodies get there, that's not possible
Mm,
for all bodies. And so
right.
therefore it's like inherently harmful and violent to expect a certain body to fit into this mold of what's considered healthy and well. And I'll say that like that's part of why I have studied Ayurveda and have been in community with. I used to run a cooperative where there's acupuncturists and Chinese herbalists working there. Both of those medical systems have much more idea about well-being and health. For like there's so many examples for it. Like a kapha body that's healthy is going to look different than a vata body that's healthy, and that's just inherent in the model. Whereas in like the ways that capitalism and white supremacy intersected with medicine,
Mm,
allopathic medicine, like that's just like not available historically. They're like there's plenty of people in the medical establishment that are trying to broaden that right now, but you never know what you're going to get going into those realms. Whereas like traditional Chinese medicine or Ayurveda are not hung up on weight. It's much more about balance, and balance is achievable by anybody.
mm. You said something really useful in that liberation for some of us is liberation for all of us. And I think the flip side to that is like repression and discrimination against any of us is repression and discrimination against all of us potentially. I'm just wondering what sort of like, if you had a teaching or a thought around how can we transmit this idea to those who are either like standing silent in the face of all this or who are actively oppressing.
Hmm. I This question has been coming up a lot recently. I've learned through my own path in activism and organizing that hitting someone over the head figuratively with like my analysis of things are not actually going to change things,
No.
right? That like politicians, if I call up my local state rep who's a Republican and
Mhm.
like
Mhm.
go hard, like he's not going to listen to me.
Right.
But if I can like do some research and like into what he cares about, inevitably I'm going to find some overlap, even if like his approach to it is much different than my approach to it. So I think like trying to like being insistent for myself on finding someone's humanity, no matter how difficult that investigation is so important. And then once I find like, their own vulnerability, there's usually a way to connect. And like
Mm.
like thinking about like a hunter here in Utah. Hunters are like usually politically much more conservative than me. And also they spend like all of autumn out on the land and I have a deep relationship with the land and deep relationship with animals that I aspire to. So can we meet in our love of the earth and the refuge that nature is to each of us? And then from there, like try to make the connection of like if there was an oil pipeline like that was built here, then like you wouldn't be able to come and hunt deer, and I wouldn't be able to like camp in silence.
I see.
Like both of us would lose something in it. So trying to find the common ground and then
Mm.
like building out from there. I pay attention to like which politicians have like trans or gay children as like an inroad and try to like take faith that shame is not liberatory. And so even if I'm so frustrated with a given politician's policies and what he supports and stands for, I'm not going to shame him into better legislation. Like we've tried hard. And I think also that's part of why the civil rights movement worked so well, because it was about building relationships. One of the mayors that was beating people on the bridge in Selma showed up for John Lewis's funeral. That is, and that's, what Martin Luther King Jr. said so often is like, we're going to win your hearts in the process. And it's a slow process. And like the political power right now is so great. And I don't know if in this moment of extreme political repression, if like, I think the political tactic is about like stopping harm much more than building relationship because the harm is so great. But I don't want us to lose sight of building relationship and finding common ground. And I think it's so important to also like notice like who are the politicians that are defectors from their party, and like we gotta support them. We gotta stand up.
That was great. That was felt really helpful. Thank you. What's giving you, if anything, what's giving you hope right now? I'm talking about genuine, embodied hope. That's not just optimism.
Uh-huh. A couple of TV shows that are like I don't know if they fit in the category of reality TV shows, but We're Here is a TV show that takes where drag queens travel the US and they put on drag shows in different rural communities and find different local performers, some of whom are part of queer communities in that rural community, and others are just our supporters, like whether it's like the parents and family of like someone, a queer person who took their life. Part of what I love about the show is like they're going to rural places where it's a lot more difficult to be queer and be loved in some ways, but they're also unveiling some of the misconceptions that urban folks might have about rural folks. And like in rural communities, they're often tighter knit because you rely on each other to a greater extent. And so you might not support the identity of your queer neighbor, but you rely on them for firewood every year, and there is like some degree of relationship there.
Yeah.
And then just like seeing the audacity of these drag queens to go to a rodeo and hand out flyers for the drag show that's coming up, and to not internalize the looks that are coming at them or the disdain that's so
Mm.
clear by some of the folks that they're meeting, and also that they're not changing who they are to accommodate those folks, but they're not judging that community. They're trying to like really deeply understand that community and what's going on, as well as uplift the different folks from that community that volunteer for the drag show. And then the same thing for Queer Eye, that they're like they find these like people who are like a wizard on the Las Vegas Strip and like who's been like disregarding his body for years, and they meet that person like seeing his goodness and really unveil that goodness over the course of the show. So I guess that's like those models are just insisting on the humanity and so full of love and also so gay that it's also like really good to see JVN march in to like someone's house who's like looks very conservative, and like JVN isn't showing like changing who they are, and at the same time they're like, this haircut would look really good on you, do you trust me to like to do this for you? And yeah, so I guess just like that example of not changing who we are, but also meeting people as they are, and that relationship then like perhaps expanding some possibilities.
How would you recommend that cis straight practitioners and cis majority spiritual communities show up in real solidarity at this moment with queer and trans people, not just in words, but in embodied everyday ways?
Yeah, I would say go to the Trans March, whatever local rally there is, and maybe even not just go there, but contact the organization that's putting it together or the coalition that's putting it together and asking to be on the security team, because cis people and straight people have much less to lose in that and can use privilege to protect. And then, thinking about any kind of queer space, whether there's a queer bar or a queer bookstore. I teach a queer and trans yoga class, and it was really moving a couple of years ago during the Colorado Springs shooting and the gay club there. I had a queer and trans yoga class the very next day and was freaked out about being in queer community, holding a publicly known queer space the day after a shooting. And I don't think there was any real threat here in Salt Lake City, but I think it just goes to show that like that impacts queer people everywhere. And I called upon some of my yoga colleagues, and one of them is this straight Latinx woman who I've shown up for in various ways. And she was like, let me hold space for you, because like your nervous system's very dysregulated and you're going to be leading a space tonight. And part of what was, she had asked me in that time together, what will allow you to feel safer teaching that class? And I said, well, if the straight therapists and yoga teachers that work at this building, if they showed up at the front door and occupy the lobby, and if there's like anyone who seems suspicious, that they're going to be the one to field it. And so I did, I asked, and 5 such folks showed up. And it was meaningful to me. And also like at the beginning of class, I invited them. Nothing happened in the lobby or outside, or, to people arriving to class. And at the beginning of class, I told the class, like, these are all therapists and yoga teachers here. And I introduced everyone. And I was like, and they love you. They don't know, you don't know them. They don't know you directly, personally, but they are here tonight to make sure that you get this class. So things like that, that I think any vulnerable community can really benefit from, whether it's like Christian folks showing up at Muslim mosques to like protect the right to prayer, right? And knowing that like if there's an attack coming, that the attacks are trying to reach people that are, that are part of queer and trans communities, not the straight folks, but the straight folks getting in the way as a tactic of protection.
And how might you imagine that an institution, like a place like Esalen, for instance, might be supportive to the same communities at this time?
Thanks for asking that question. It feels like a new moment within realms like Esalen and Kripalu to be asking that question. I just got off a phone call this morning, actually, with someone at Kripalu who's going to host a retreat for free to participants, but the 2 of us teachers, are going to get paid, and we're going to recruit leaders of queer organizations to be there to rest and restore. So, which I guess is just to say, to use the facility that Esalen is with as much generosity towards targeted communities as possible. So like removing as many barriers as possible for folks to show up. So many of these places are located in difficult to reach places. And so then like thinking ahead of like around car shares or like traveling there. I know one of my colleagues who's Indian was teaching with me at Kripalu. She said it felt a little scary to go from the Albany airport to Kripalu and this rural community that she was unfamiliar with. So I think that's also like providing some information of like, who is your community? And like, in that drive there, like are we going to see Confederate flags, or are we going to see trans flags? Like things like that, like tell us about like where Esalen is. And then also like building relationships, right, locally with queer organizations that support undocumented people. That's another thing I was really touched by with Kripalu recently, is that they are how can I say this in a way that's gonna protect them? A lot of their longtime leaders are showing up for immigrant communities that are targeted right now in really beautiful and meaningful ways that do put their bodies on the line.
Mm.
And they got there because of the racial justice work that Kripalu has been doing since 2020. If the whole institution hadn't been doing that work, then the individual people in that institution wouldn't have gotten to the place where they're like, I'm ready. I got you, my, immigrant neighbor. Yeah. And then I think, having queer representation on the staff of Esalen and the retreat leaders of Esalen, and trying to reach like into more and more marginalized aspects of any given communities, like not just having Black teachers, but what if there's like a queer Black teacher, or like not just having a non-binary teacher, but what about like a Pakistani non-binary teacher? Something like that, or at least like the goal of like getting there. And then I think, there's lots of us in these various communities that are currently targeted, that have been doing this work for decades, that have the spiritual training to hold our people.
Mm-hmm.
And so then backing us in whatever ways
Yes.
that you all can.
Yes. Jacoby, in your book, it's this tapestry, really, and you're doing this weaving of trans wisdom, Black feminism, Buddhist teachings, and it becomes something that's deeply alive. And that tapestry is rich, like all tapestries. It's strong for its diverseness. And in this era, this eradication of the so-called diverse and the divergent, how do we respond in a useful and productive way that rides that balance between rage and tenderness?
I look to the earth and natural ecosystems as an example of the strength of diversity, right? If you have a tree farm, it's much more susceptible to illness and disease than a diverse forest, right? Part of it, I think those of us who do diversity, equity, inclusion work are trying to not give up what we do, and not shy away from that political targeting, but also trying to be creative about how can we do what we do under different words.
Right.
Like I have lots of colleagues who have issued the label of DEI because they're like, if that's like the building that we're building, like that's going to be, we see it thrown into the fires right now. Like, can we be like a scattered web and like a tapestry and show up in all of our different places, but have different words to it? Like a lot of people have been working with the word belonging, and if like so many words are going to be seen as a threat over time, when the work underneath it is a threat, right? Like when diversity, equity, inclusion work started, the threatening word was integration. And so that's where conservatives aimed their attention at, and DEI work could then grow. So I guess also just to know that like the threat is going to shift, but over time, can we be like kind of like building a snowball that's getting bigger and bigger, and kind of like picking people off of like people that might otherwise resist or invalidate the work of DEI? Can we, it's another like task of meeting them where they're at. How can we draw them in and be like, this is about your family, this is about your community, this is about your history and your ancestors too. This isn't this isolated group. This is about all of us, which is why, all of us can benefit from queer liberation. All of us can benefit from feminism. All of us benefit, when Black lives matter, all lives will matter, is what the Combahee River Collective said back in the like 80s, which is where the word, like the term Black Lives Matter came from.
Well, there's a cognitive disconnect. Earlier I was happy that you mentioned the racial work that Kripalu and many others have been doing since 2020. And in that summer, I read for the first time White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. And that book, which I initially was like, I don't know about all this. That book made an enormous impact on me. And the thesis of it has been like doubled down upon, right? Like whiteness has shown itself as
That's fragile.
extraordinarily fragile with the fury, that
Yeah.
that it has attacked that racial reckoning. I don't know, we don't have to go deep on this, but I'm just like curious from your perspective how we can help people get past that cognitive dissonance that makes them feel like if we are checking into the experiences of others who are different than ourselves, it's actually a zero-sum game, that some of that awareness is being drawn away from ourselves, that we're losing something.
Well, I think, just like an ecosystem that's a tree that is like recreated as a tree farm is bound to fail, so is any other group or culture or country that denies its diversity. And so part of it is like letting karma play out and like trying to keep ourselves like as well and safe in the process as we can so that we survive it.
Ah,
Um, and then also, I think part of like what you just shared with Rama D'Angelo's book is like those of us who have a spiritual practice, part of the spiritual practice is inviting us, harnessing tools to further tolerate discomfort, right? And so you're leaning on that, like those spiritual tools to be like, okay, I don't want to, but I'm going to read it anyway because some part of me that says I should, but like really I'm kicking and screaming, but I'm going to do it. So I think for any of us with the spiritual practice to investigate like whose analysis of the current like political situation do we have resistance towards, if we can we lean in rather than lean out. Like I have some of my colleagues, Kazu Haga, who wrote Healing Resistance. He has a practice of listening to Fox News because he's like, there's got to be truth because like it keeps going and it's
mm,
meaningful to some people.
mhm,
And so rather than like turning my head and looking the other way and like othering them, like can I actually turn in and like see like, oh well, that they have a good point there. Like every now and then they might. Or whether that's towards, a writer that's like Rama D'Angelo that's encouraging us towards further justice politics. We all have like those discomforts and those like areas that they lean away from. And my hope in spiritual practice is that it can help us like actually usher us into that and be more resourced going into those uncomfortable areas.
whose shoulders do you stand on in this work? Are there specific ancestors or teachers or lineages, queer or otherwise, that you carry forward in your practice?
Yeah, it's been meaningful for me to go like far enough back into the British Isles where there were indigenous people there too, and that like those are my ancestors. So definitely them who were, worked with rock and stone to build buildings, and so had a deep intimacy with the land in that way, or who were harvesting fish and seaweed from the seas and so had a deep relationship with the oceans and the well-being of the oceans that way, or drawing food and medicine from the plants growing around. And then I mean definitely Black feminists, there's countless of them: Audre Lorde, Bell Hooks, Angela Davis, Barbara Jordan. Like there's so many to name. I feel like a perpetual student of Black feminism. And then I was raised without religion or a spiritual practice. And a few generations back, my family was Quakers. And so I'm trying to get back to that. And also, I'm a Buddhist and a yogi. And so, like, also see like a lot of intersections between those different practices, like, the nurturing of silence and stillness, the relationship with the earth is part of all of those spiritual traditions. And then standing on the shoulders of like the ancestors of the lineages of Buddhism and yoga, like I literally owe my life to the people of India and the people of South Asia, because without these practices I wouldn't have survived. And it's not enough just to name them. I also, try to take myself off of any kind of pedestal and, to say that like the teachings are living through me. This is not like Jacoby Ballard, these are the teachings. And then also for whenever I get financial gain from any of these practices that are not my ancestral practices, to give money to the people, to organizations and communities that are as a path of reparations and wealth redistribution. And one more community, of course, I stand on the shoulders of like queer people everywhere and throughout time.
Jacoby, if you could offer one heart teaching right now to a young queer or trans person coming of age in this current moment, what would that be?
It would definitely be loving kindness. The Buddha offered loving kindness as a cloak of protection. And I didn't understand that in a personal embodied way until very recently. But I think in this political era, when there's so many arrows coming at us, that putting ourselves in touch with a magic from within that can never be taken, that can never be extinguished, that's inherently a part of ourselves, can mean survival or not. I don't know if queer and trans communities can thrive in this political moment, but I know we can survive. So some of the phrases of metta, I have a whole chapter on loving kindness in my book. There's lots of books written on loving kindness. But one of the practices you can do is just offering yourself these phrases of love, and they might feel corny or cheesy to begin with. And that's because the world hasn't offered you love or taught you that you're deserving of love. But to say them anyway, and to say them regularly, inwardly, and also to those who are like you, to other queer and trans folks around you, to say to yourself, may I be loved and loving. May I be safe and protected. May I have the conditions to thrive and to rest. May I trust my inherent belonging. And may I have ease. And just saying them again and again until you believe them. And then when you believe them, that's going to transform your thoughts, your words, and your actions to come from that place. And the practice of metta has so transformed my heart and produced a self-love for me that several years ago, I sat in a room with an anti-trans activist who was like brought to campus during Trans Awareness Week, and I was also brought to the same campus. And I could sit in front of her and regard her presentation and not take any of it personally, and also at the same time not dehumanize her. And so that's what the Buddha meant about protection, is protecting myself from her hateful words. And then it's also protecting her from my reactivity to her hateful words.
Is there any program that you want to promote or anything that you want to speak to in this calendar year?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for asking that. I teach an annual queer and trans yoga retreat here in Utah, and it feels really important, just like the show, we're here to like claim queer space in a state like Utah. So that's in July, at the end of July. And I think of it as a place to be in community and to restore ourselves and rest and be gay on the yoga mat and like on a hike in the mountains and like embody our fullness. And then I'm also teaching a forgiveness retreat in October at Kripalu, which is really tender at this time when there's a lot to forgive at this moment. But I think of forgiveness as like a practice of like clearing away so that we ourselves don't carry a burden. So I'm leading a forgiveness retreat with my dear friend Jess Frey at Kripalu in October as well.
And these training and retreats can be seen at jacobyballard.net. That's JACOBYBALLARD.net. Jacoby Ballard, thank you so much for your time today.
Oh, thank you so much, Sam. It's been really great to talk to you.
Today's show is produced in conjunction with Shira Levine. Our theme music is by Nico Holloman. Additional music by Blue Dot Sessions. Think critically, because why not?